Elizabeth, known on Instagram as Patent Scientist, and I'm right now preparing for PhD programs. I've been studying for the GRE. I've also done some LSAT prep in the past because I'm interested in going into law school in the future. So Steve and I are kind of going to be going through some tips that may be helpful for you as you prepare for the LSAT or the GRE or kind of any standardized test.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. I'm Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. And I thought it'd be fun to get together with Elizabeth and share some advice on whether you're studying for the LSAT or the GRE or just standardized tests in general. We thought we'd share some general advice for all of you, no matter what you're prepping for.
So one of the big points and one of the major things I made sure that I did when I first started studying for both the LSAT and the GRE was make sure that I had a study schedule prepared. So I spent probably even 10 to 20 hours just researching both of the exams, the LSAT and the GRE, making sure I understood each of the sections inside and out, what I was getting myself into, what resources were out there, and how much time I really needed to allocate to each test. For each individual, it kind of may be different, but anywhere from several months to even half a year, maybe what you need. Anywhere from a couple hours a day to several hours a day may fit you best to help you prepare for the exam.
100% agreed, Elizabeth. I think sometimes students want to rush into taking exam after exam and measuring their results, when instead, sometimes you have to slow down in order to speed up. And that requires setting up a systematic plan of attack so that step by step, day by day, you know exactly what to do and what not to do. I've laid out a variety of LSAT study schedules on my website, and they follow a 5-step approach that I call the laser approach to studying: learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review, so that you're learning the basics under untimed conditions before you give yourself that extra timing pressure. And that idea of half a year, that's really not too long. When you consider the importance of the LSAT or the GRE in your admissions chances, it's well worth making that time investment. It's oftentimes more important than your undergraduate GPA. So spending more than 2 to 3 months, ideally at least 5 to 6 to reach your fullest potential, is well worth it.
And I kind of definitely agree with that. So far, I think I've put in about 2.5, maybe 3 months for the GRE. And over that time, it's not like I've been spending 10 hours a day studying the GRE. Sometimes I don't study a day. Sometimes I study maybe a couple of hours. Sometimes I, put in work and study maybe 8 hours a day, do a practice test and review that practice test that day. But having that reinforcement over that period of time really helps me feel more comfortable with the exam. And now going to take it, when I take it September 21st, I know I will have put in the work, I've put in the time, I won't feel guilty like I could have done more. And you're not going to, question the things that you could have done. Whereas if you only give yourself 3 weeks, I know some people have only studied 2 weeks for the GRE. Yeah, they may do fine, but you're not going to be having that anxiety and doubt if you give yourself more time. You're never going to regret having more time as opposed to having less time.
That's so true. You don't want to sell yourself short on this. It's funny, back when I was studying for the LSAT myself, I took a cold diagnostic and got a 152. And I was pretty discouraged about that because I was hoping for a top 14 law school. I'd gone to a top undergrad, and it took me months to break out of the 150s. And I ultimately scored a 175 on test day. And it took me an entire year to get there. And so I'm not saying it should take anyone that long necessarily, but if I'd quit after 2 or 3 months, I never would have gotten to my goal score, and I would have never achieved my fullest true potential. And so if you're studying over a period of 2 to 3 months or longer, I definitely agree, Elizabeth. I think that you're not going to necessarily put in 8 hours every single day, nor should you. That's a recipe for burnout, in my opinion. And that's what I've seen from a lot of students who take full-length timed exams on back-to-back days. It just leads to burnout. But slow down, set a reasonable, realistic study schedule where it's maybe 10, 20 hours a week, especially if you have other obligations. And it's one of those cases where really slow and steady wins the race in the end.
And what you said about starting with a low LSAT score, my first diagnostic LSAT score was like a 148. I barely finished sections. I did really poorly. And that's doesn't even mean you're doomed. My second diagnostic, I think, went up several points after that. And I only got in about 2 months into my LSAT prep. But even as long as you stay persistent with your prep and you keep going forward, you're going to get better. It's nothing to be discouraged about. And one of the things to avoid is definitely don't go looking on all the forums that are going to tell you, like, your diagnostic means you're doomed and all of that type of stuff. Don't continue to doubt yourself. I guess that would be a second piece of advice that I have. You can quickly fall into the trap of thinking that you're not good enough because of the score that you got, but these tests are designed to be able to be learned. So, like the GRE, for example, the most difficult math on the GRE is Algebra 2. I've gone up to taking calculus. I'm very good at math. I was a math teacher. I taught middle school math. I know I'm good at math. My first quant score was not even a 150. I was extremely discouraged. I was like, wait, is everything I know a lie? Am I not good? But it's just the test, and you have to learn the test and the test questions and what the test makers want you to know. So you really do have to take the time, calm down, don't let your anxiety make you perform worse than you would if you had a calm mind.
Yeah, definitely so true. I mean, a diagnostic is not a reflection of your intelligence or your self-worth as an individual. All it tells you is that you haven't yet learned this material, and it tells you where you need to focus. And I'm actually of the opinion that diagnostic tests for both the LSAT and GRE aren't necessarily worth doing. They can serve as a good benchmark for you to later measure your progress, which is nice. But the LSAT in particular, that's like a foreign language, especially the logic games. Most people do not do well on those their first time around. And the other sections are surprisingly difficult as well, even the reading comprehension. And so I find most students improve significantly from their diagnostics just because they didn't learn the material at first, then they go out and learn it. They naturally improve over time regardless. And prep companies love to use diagnostics to claim responsibility for having helped students achieve those improvements, when in reality, everyone improves no matter what. But that could serve as motivation, or it could serve as to maybe depress you a little bit. So just know what kind of person you are and take your results with a grain of salt.
Yeah, and as far as the GRE goes, the diagnostic, in my opinion, was especially not helpful because, I'm 24 now, and a lot of the math on the GRE is high school geometry, high school algebra 2, factoring, what's the surface area of a cylinder. A lot of us haven't taken that math in 5, 6, 7, maybe more years. So that's not math we're using every day. That's not common, math memory anymore. That's not things that we're using in our practice. Even like every day I do research in a lab, those aren't calculations that I'm doing. Even, when you go up to a level in calculus, you're using advanced algebra, applying those concepts, but it's still not the same kind of math. So you can't expect yourself to be responsible for that content. So if you're judging yourself on knowing content from 10 years ago, you're really not being fair to yourself. So if you want to take a diagnostic, at least brush up on the concepts first and then go into it and see how you do. And then maybe, take a step back, try to learn the questions a little more, take another test, and then kind of base your studying off of that and see what you need to improve on from there.
Definitely. It's always worth brushing up on the foundational material before going in. And my opinion, at least, is when you're working through the material building your foundation, certain areas will be easier and you'll get through those more quickly. Other areas, which are your weak areas, you'll slow down on and your accuracy will be lower. And so you'll naturally have a sense of where to spend more time. You'll get a sense of what you like, what you don't like. And so you'll know where to focus automatically.
Yeah. And at least for me, like after you get through your first couple diagnostics or your first couple times doing practice questions, which is sometimes the hardest thing to do, to sit down and open a book and look at the questions, because it feels very daunting and there's a lot of anxiety like accompanied with it, because these tests have a lot of, there's a lot at stake with taking these tests. But once you realize, like, hey, like me, for example, like I'm actually good at logic games. A lot of people struggle with logic games, but maybe that's because I'm a more analytical thinker. But I really struggle with reading comprehension. That's something I need to work on. So, but those tools and those things you notice are very, very helpful when you go back and like edit your study schedule. Like maybe I should allocate more days to reading comp and less days to logic games because I can pick those up more quickly.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Elizabeth, because yeah, study schedules do need to be modified. I've put out study schedules. I know others have as well for the GRE, and they serve as general frameworks to give you a comprehensive overview of the material that's being tested. But you do want to adapt any schedule to your areas of strength and weakness. You want to devote maybe fewer days or do fewer practice problems on those areas where you're stronger, and then save that time for the areas where you're weaker and devote some extra time there. Maybe adjust the ratio of questions you're working on accordingly.
So I guess going back to keeping a study schedule, you may feel like you're required to practice a whole bunch every day, and you may feel guilty, like, I didn't practice 2 hours today, and my study schedule says I need to practice 2 hours, and I need to do 10 games, and I need to do 3 reading comp passages, and I didn't do that. Well, it may not be that bad in the end. I always try to push myself each day to at least open my book or open my prep website that I'm using and do like 5 questions, or at least open one of my vocabulary apps and cycle through 1 deck of vocab. Or even if like I'm super busy one day and there's absolutely no time to sit down and do my GRE prep for that day, there's so many resources on YouTube, or if you're doing like a lesson-based type prep program or something like that, you can listen to lessons in the car, or podcasts, or anything to learn about the test. Like put something on in the car rather than listening to music. The amount of vocab that I've learned by supplementing vocab instead of music in my car ride is actually like phenomenal. Like it's blown my mind, and just little adjustments that you make to your day by optimizing the way you manage your time can actually make up for study time that you thought that you've lost, and you don't actually need to feel so bad about, not studying for 10 hours a day, 5 hours a day. It's just making sure you study a little bit each day.
So true. It's funny how the internet and the technology has allowed us to study on the go, with apps and podcasts and websites. Even if you don't have your books with you, even if you're overseas without access to the physical prep books themselves, there's podcasts for everything. There's YouTube for everything. I have the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcasts where I'm releasing new material daily. And I love what you said about keeping momentum going every single day. I do recommend taking days off from doing full-length timed exams or individual sections where you're really hitting the books, because that could be grueling. It's worth taking a break. You don't want to burn out. But yeah, in your car, on your commute, whatever you're doing, running errands, putting in the headphones and making a choice to listen to something educational related to your test prep or learning vocabulary for the GRE, rather than music or your just entertainment-related podcast, or for your YouTube while you're eating lunch or taking a break. Choose something where you're actually learning a lesson. You can listen, you can watch with the subtitles if you need to, but there's always something you can be doing, even if it's kind of on in the background as a supplement.
I guess for even people who are listening right now or watching or seeing this on Instagram, whatever the format is, even if you're not ready to go into LSAT, GRE, whatever kind of prep right now, and have your full 6-month study schedule, 3-month study schedule. You're taking the LSAT July 5th, whatever the dates are for the next year. I don't think they're out yet. But it's not too early to start learning vocab. It's not too early to take a jab at a logic game and get familiar with the test. It's not too early to listen to some podcasts about the LSAT if you know you're going to be taking it soon. Because when I started kind of investigating, I'm thinking about maybe doing this law school thing, and I started listening to the things that were going to help me get there. That saved a lot of time for when I started getting serious about my graduate school applications. And you're going to really thank yourself later when you're like, oh, wow, I learned all this vocabulary just kind of for fun almost. And now I know all of these words and all these terms and all these things that I could apply rather than cramming for them in my 6-month study period that I had for the GRE. Or even if for reading comprehension, I know that's a very long-term skill that is built. It's very difficult to study for reading comprehension. And there's kind of really only a threshold that you can get to start reading books, start challenging yourself with different literature that you're picking up, just to kind of prepare you for the things that you know are ahead, even if they're in the more distant future.
Definitely. Reading comprehension, especially, it does take longer to learn. You can't overcome an entire lifetime of never reading books and then suddenly attack reading comprehension on a standardized test. And that does take longer than 3 months to build or 6 months to build. And so I would encourage folks, go out and read the Scientific American or the Economist just to get used to reading dense, difficult text, and especially reading dense, difficult text on screen, since now the LSAT is digital going forward, at least in North America. And with regard to just passively absorbing the information about the process in general, could help to remove a lot of the anxiety around applying to graduate school, applying to law school, taking these exams. You can listen to these podcasts without ever even opening a prep book yet or doing a single question, just to get familiar with what is on this exam. And one of the nice things about audio that I like is that you could listen to a podcast while you're doing errands and then listen to it again 6 months later and pick up new insights from it. There's a lot of value in that repetition to really absorb things fully.
Yeah, podcasts, ever since I started listening to podcasts, have become like my new favorite thing, regardless of kind of the content. Listening, and whether you're kind of an audio or visual or regardless of the type of learner that you are, hearing things or learning things or seeing things in different formats is very helpful. And when it comes down to taking your test, you're going to realize how those different things play into how you answer questions. You may be reading a passage and see a word, but you don't really remember it, and then you're like, oh, I remember hearing this word, or I remember seeing this word, and then you remember more of a context if you heard it in a podcast, as opposed to remembering the flashcard definition. I also think it's really important to make sure that you time your practice, not just make sure that you time your practice exams, because time is also one of the biggest enemies or challengers in these kind of exams. The LSAT, the GRE, they're both a little over 3 hours, I believe. I don't know the exact timing.
Yeah, around 3 hours.
Breaks. But that sounds like a long time, but when you get in there and you start taking a section, it is not long at all, especially on the logic games. How much does the time break down per game?
So you get 35 minutes per section and then an average of 8:45 per game.
Yeah. So it's not a long time, especially with the more complicated ones. The more quickly you can answer a question with logic games, the better. So a tool that I use is a watch or a timer, but I like the watch because it doesn't make a noise. It'll just vibrate on my wrist, so I can go over if I happen to take a little longer and it's not too obnoxious. But I'll set the timer for however long I need on a question, and then I'll answer the question, and then it actually trains me to only spend that amount of time on a question. And then that way, when I do a full-length practice, I kind of have that trained or innate behavior to spend that amount of time on a question. And I get faster and faster and faster on each section, rather than kind of just melting away the clock and being like, oh, wow, I have 5 questions left and 1 minute.
I love that advice. I love the idea of introducing timing early because, of course, these exams are timed and the time constraints are pretty brutal. It's not even reasonable to ask people to complete these questions in the time allotted. And so they're really pushing you to your limits. And the LSAT's a little bit different in that I wouldn't recommend timing individual games or individual passages because they do vary in difficulty. But I would agree that it's useful for when doing timed sections, time them for 35 minutes And at first, you could set your watch or timer to finish at the 35-minute mark to notify you then. And then you could continue working after that to complete the section just to finish it. And then go back and see, where did you actually run out of time? How could you adjust your pacing accordingly? Because that is one of the big factors in doing well in this exam, aside from the content itself, aside from the accuracy, is the pacing and the endurance. What do you think about nerves and anxiety? How does that play into timing for you? And any advice you have on that?
So I noticed that the more distractions that I have, the more nervous that I get. I've taken the practice before as well. So I'm kind of a little familiar with the testing environment. I know that they give you the sound for headphones. So if I take a practice exam, I'll put these on, which kind of feel the same, just kind of simulate the environment more, which also helps block out sound. But I noticed that if there's a distraction, I will get more nervous about the question. And like, especially if it's a passage or like a section that I'm weak on. So like the verbal section on the GRE or reading comp on the LSAT. And then when I get nervous, I'll do really poorly on that section. And then that makes me more nervous. So when something like that happens, if I'm practicing or doing a practice exam, I'll actually stop for a minute and take a second, 30 seconds, 25 seconds, whatever it is, and like not even look at the exam, put my pencil down, and just close my eyes and breathe for a little bit, because that's the only thing that's going to actually calm me down. And it's worth taking like the 25, 30 seconds, calm down, rather than blowing through questions and getting like 5 questions wrong. Because like that's how much my anxiety will get ramped up from the distraction. Or even if I'm getting in my head about a question because I get stumped on not knowing what the word is that goes in the blank. So if you are a person that struggles with anxiety or distractions and things like that get to you, I would recommend coming up with some sort of a system during test day, whether it's taking a deep breath or there's different like kind of like tapping techniques that you can do, coming up with something that's not going to kill your time, but that's going to calm you down, so that you don't let that be the reason you do poorly, because it's not worth it.
I love that advice. I also agree. It's important to develop the ability to slow down, pause, take a deep breath, even with all the stress and adrenaline of test day. And that's hard. And the way you do that is by training it early during your time practice tests, during your time sections. Do the exact same thing. And you can train this. It's, as you can call it meditation or focus training, whatever you want. But being able to kind of zoom out, take the big picture, recognize that you may be having difficulty with this one question, but that one question is not necessarily representative of how you'll do on the exam as a whole. And you could always come back to it later. There are some great meditation apps out there. There's Headspace, there's Calm, there's the Focus app, there's a million guided meditations on YouTube as well. Just try out a bunch, find what works for you, and use it consistently. Even just 5 minutes a day over the course of a few months could make a big difference. And if you have a longer timeline, or if you're not even starting the actual test prep process yet, this is one of those things where if you do it over the course of 6 months or a year or longer, you'll be amazed at the rapid transformation and the benefits you can get over a longer period of time.
Yeah, and even in worst case scenario, I think it's important to know that even if you think you did poorly on an entire section, that entire section isn't the entire exam, and you should not let that, bring you down for the entire exam. You have to kind of learn how to pick yourself up and just move on to the next exam section. So like if you're in the LSAT or the GRE, if your first like the exam section is like the logic games, and you struggle with that, and you're like, oh no, how am I going to get past it? Take a deep breath. That's over. Put it in the past. Now you're focused on reading comp. If you struggle on quant in the GRE and you've got a really difficult, it's usually a mid-level quant section for your first section, but if you really struggle with quant section, just relax, take a deep breath, move on to your next section, and try to make it a strong one. You always kind of have time to get at least some of those points back. And worst case scenario, they are multiple choice exams, except for the writing portion of the GRE. And you're always going to have a certain percentage to even get the right answer. So it's not, at the end of the day, you have a chance to get things right and you have a chance to redeem your score. So don't let the fear of getting things wrong make you get more things wrong.
Exactly. And there's no guessing penalty. You do want to fill in everything, and you have at least some odds on that. And by the way, I don't want to circle back to something you said earlier, Elizabeth, about the headphones. They give you those noise canceling headphones on the GRE.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yes. At least the testing centers that I've been to. And it's even for the MCAT, it's the same way as well.
That's cool. I wish the LSAT would do that. They don't give you anything.
Oh, they don't?
Not even earplugs. Not even earplugs. So all that means is like anything else. Yeah, you've just got to practice like it's game day. Take tests in potentially distracting environments. Because I'm sure that even at the GRE testing centers, there are other people around and they could make a little bit of noise, or even if they move around or the proctor moves, that could distract you a little bit, right?
Yeah. I had a friend recently who just took the MCAT, and they have the noise canceling headphones, but they really don't cancel all the noise. It just kind of helps you stay in your bubble more. And most places they'll have kind of the cubbies that you're in, and you have your computer screen. But there was a kid, or not a kid, a young man near him who had a cold, and he was sniffling the whole time, coughing, sneezing, doing that sort of thing. And that has like an 8-hour exam. So something like that could happen during your exam day, and the proctor may or may not say anything about it. So I think, being prepared for something like that is definitely in your favor, even though it's not ideal or optimal.
And also just don't be that guy. Don't be that guy who's sniffling. Just stay home.
Don't be that guy. Yeah. Find a way to reschedule, especially I know LSAT dates aren't really flexible. Same with MCAT dates, but the GRE, they have it almost every day of the month. If you're sick, try to reschedule it to the next day of the month, unless you have a very hard deadline. Like, it's not worth ruining someone else's chance when they've been preparing for this, because you want to be that guy.
Definitely. And just in general, practice in distracting environments, a coffee shop, a library. A lot of prep companies offer free proctored exams for marketing purposes. And so you can kind of ignore the sales pitch and just bring your own exam, even if you want, just to have that proctored setting with other people in the room.
Especially if you've never been in that kind of environment again or before. Or even like if you think back to, like, I know in AP exams in high school, or like if you remember like the SATs or that sort of thing, it's similar to that. So if you remember those environments and you were okay in them, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. But if you struggled with that, then practice.
Exactly. Take a bunch in that situation. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not the same as, being in your like comfy study nook at home.
No, it's definitely not. Get out of the house, go to one of those environments and do a half dozen exams like that. So that test is just another run through.
Yeah.
Awesome, Elizabeth. Well, this has been a blast. Why don't we let people know the best way to reach each of us?
All right. So you can reach me on Instagram. It's at The Patent Scientist. I'm also on Facebook with the same name. You could also email me. It's at Elizabeth Almerinda, ALMERINDA @gmail.com. And that's it.
Awesome. And folks can reach me, Steve Schwartz, on the LSAT blog website, or the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and pretty much everywhere else, as well as on Instagram at LSAT Unplugged, and email me personally at lsatunplugged@gmail.com.
All right. Thanks, Steve.